The passion, the energy, the power, the spirit of hardcore.
Here's my contact info. It's totally fine and really good for me if you contact me for any reason, and if I can help you, I will. I love doing that any way I can. The talk I'm going to give today is really different than any talk I've given before. For one thing, that's the only slide. I normally have like a couple hundred and whip through them, but this one's also kind of rambly. But hopefully by the end, it'll all tie together with some uplifting message so that we can all go off to the next talk. And yeah, let's see. I've just a little intro about me. Michael said about TV Be Gone. I'm an inventor, and I've been a geek all my life, but I'm also a teacher and a mentor. And in the 1980s, I was one of the people who pioneered virtual reality, one of the people who coined the terms even. I worked in Silicon Valley, whatever, for many, many, many years as a consultant and started my own company, which against all odds was actually successful. But an important part of my past, which I've mentioned in many of my talks, because it is an important part of me, is that I grew up the first half of my life totally depressed. I'm 67 years old, and up till 33 is when I really started to figure out ways of living a life with my depression and living a life I love living. And part of this talk, I'll give some insights that I found along the way. This talk really is very philosophical. I'll be touching on some of the topics that Michael mentioned and also earlier Paul mentioned. Yeah, and maybe it'll come together. Let's see. I have worked a lot on myself through the years because something inside of me, although I was totally depressed, knew that somehow I could live with this depression and live beyond just that depression and not be just identified with it. So I do want to share some of those insights as well, and many of the things that I talk about with people who I mentor, things that have been really helpful for other people, and maybe it'll resonate with you and be helpful for you. And I'm going to start off with kind of a strange place. We have no control over so much in our lives, and yet most of us want control. Not sure why, but it seems to be part of us. We want to have control, and yet we don't have it. We certainly have absolutely no control over our emotions and feelings. They just seem to happen. No matter how much we want them to be different than they are, there they are. We also have very little control, maybe a little control, but very little over our thoughts. Our thoughts just seem to come up. Maybe we can choose on which thoughts to pay attention to, but that's about it. And that leads to what we do have control about, what we choose. We have total control over what we choose, which doesn't mean that it's easy. In fact, it can be really hard. I mean, I can choose to put my left foot there. That was easy. But when it comes down to difficult decisions, so much depends on our past experiences, what we're afraid of, what we're terrified of, the external surroundings, our obligations, our responsibilities. It's not easy. But we have total control over what we choose. And I'll be going into that more later. The thing is, everything is temporal. Everything lasts only a certain amount of time, including our lives. And this is appropriate now with this big change that's happening with the organization here that puts on this event. This is the last one, certainly with this name. This is the last event in this building under its current name. The organization is changing. Our lives constantly change, and our lives end. We only have certain amount of time in our lives to do everything that we do. Everything cool we do, every stupid thing that we do, everything we regret, everything we love, we can only do that while we're alive. We can feel what we feel, though, while we're doing that, and think what we think, and choose what to do along the way, and we can explore and discover and learn and grow as long as we are alive. So let's make use of that. But what do you choose to do with however much, however little time you have left in your life? What do you choose to do? Again, it's totally up to you what you choose. Even if it's not easy, it is totally up to you, ultimately, what you choose to do. Choice is a very powerful thing. Our choices affect us greatly, each of us, and it affects those around you. And as has been pointed out by Paul, it affects everyone, positively, negatively, big, small. But so often, we do not choose consciously. A big part of our brain is a mechanism to automatically do things. It doesn't use much energy. We don't want to use a whole lot of energy. And by default, we make choices, well, by default, not consciously. As kids, we definitely can't choose very consciously because we don't have enough experience yet in order to even know how to do that or even about the concept. Yet as kids, we're constantly making choices. We're just not doing it really knowing what we're doing. And many of those choices we make because of our background, because of the experiences, good and bad, because of our parents, and they made their choices as kids because of their parents. These choices we made as kids still can very much be driving us. As an example, a former friend of mine from a long time ago was randomly beaten by his alcoholic father as a kid. His father would come home dead drunk and scream at him, "You will never amount to anything." My friend told me this over and over again. And as a kid, of course, he internalized that, as we all do from our parents' behaviors. He defined amount to anything as making lots of money, because that's what his father did. And continually, by the time I met him, he had been trying to prove to his now long dead father that he could amount to something by making more money. But no matter how much money he made, he could not prove to his long dead father that he amounted to something for real. He didn't know what to do, so he just continued doing what he did, and he's still doing that to this day. And under that definition of making lots of money, he's been quite successful. Only he can say if he's successful at living a life that he thinks is worth living. Middle and upper class kids, and I'm lower middle class, but still upper class culture, we grow up being told that we should go out in the world and make a difference. Do something noticeable, hopefully something great. If our parents were more into capitalism, it would be like, grow up and be a CEO of a big company, or a vice president in your spot in there, or a VC, a venture capitalist, or as we called them in Silly Valley, vulture capitalists. As lefties, like my parents, I was raised to go out into the world and make a difference by making it a better place. Fight against oppression, defeat oppression if we can. Again, middle and upper class kids are so often told to go out and do something great. What does that mean? We don't really think about what great means, but why are we driven to do something great? Does that mean what? I don't know, but something is driving us because we're told that over and over again, and we believe we can do it. We should go out and change the world, hopefully for the better. As kids, no matter which economic background or which culture, we want recognition from our parents because these are the most important people in the universe. Our lives, our survival is totally dependent on these people. We want notice from our parents. We can get it by doing positive things, and if that doesn't work, we can do it by negative things. And some people are predisposed to do one or the other. We also have this weird notion, especially in the country that I come from, and many other countries. The US is mine. I now live in Berlin for many reasons. But anyways, one thing that seems to be driving so many people is the desire to be famous. What is so good about being famous? We look at people who are famous, so many of them are not people we need to emulate. Yet, So many people want to be famous. We can be famous for doing all sorts of amazingly wonderful things. We can also be famous, or really infamous, for doing super negative things. But is famous good? Well, there's pluses and minuses in everything. I met someone at a conference a year or two ago who told me that he was famous. He was really famous within his circles. And he wrote popular books, he gave crowded talks that were really popular at these conferences he went to, and he said that everything changed when 500,000 people knew he existed. It's a matter of probabilities, he said. A teeny percentage of total wackos out of 500,000 is actually a number of people. And he started having very strange wackos messing with him, because they were wackos. He actually started getting death threats. He took them seriously, but not so seriously. He got this one from some right-winger, it turned out, when some defense security people he hired looked into it. And he hired these security people because this person said that he would be killed at his next conference, which he actually went to anyways. But the security people he hired found the guy, he had a gun, and he was ready to use it. Now this person lives in what he calls Europe and won't give any other information other than that. No other public appearances, and hopefully now he can live his life, chill out, and move on. I got famous not because I wanted to be famous. It was just an outgrowth of doing things that I love doing. Teaching, mentoring, putting my inventions out. I became super famous for a short amount of time for creating TV Be Gone, as Michael said, this keychain that turns televisions off in public places. And oddly enough, the first day of sales was so popular that I was invited to be on virtually every television station on the planet for inventing a device that turns TVs off. Fucking A. And so millions of people knew about me, and I got lots of wacko emails. And but that kind of was short-lived. And so anyways, by this time, I'm mildly famous on the internet for certain circles, certainly in the hacker scene, because I go around the world. Going around the world, giving workshops and giving talks at conferences. And a bunch of people know who I am. And there are some probability of some wackos which I have to contend with. Fame is useful, though, on the other hand, for having people pay attention to a message that you think is worth sharing, like I'm doing now. But it does make me a target. And that part is no fun. In fact, it can be quite traumatic. I have like 7,000 or something like that Twitter followers. Followers, what a notion. I have 5,000 or so Facebook friends. I use these so-called social media for broadcast, just to let people know, hey, I'm giving a talk here, or here's a video of something I did, or a cute picture of a 4-year-old holding a soldering iron at a workshop or something. But people can make use of all of the people who follow or friend me or whatever, my connections online, to call attention to themselves. And this has happened quite often. I mentioned this in a previous talk, that someone with a few thousand Twitter followers used me as a target and accused me, absurdly enough, of derailing the rights of women in China, causing some bizarre controversy amongst her followers. And she went up from 8,000 Twitter followers to over 10,000 afterwards. That was actually quite horrible, traumatic for me. Someone else can score some points because it seems to be a game by assuring someone who made a public statement of appreciation for me from a workshop that I gave on a public forum that this person just was saying, oh yeah, the workshop was great. This person seems really cool. And he assured that person that I am total dick. I am not cool. I am a total dick because I force people to use lead solder with lead in it, which is toxic. And I only do that so that those workshop participants won't ruin my soldering irons. And I'm like, what? I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. But anyways, that person got a lot of attention through that. But it hurts. Someone I used to know, and this is happening right now, someone I used to know 25 years ago or 20 years ago, I can't even remember, someone who's an acquaintance, maybe we've seen each other 10 times, is accusing me of doing something incredibly horrible. He's using my connections on LinkedIn, of all places, to get their connection, find their email address, and then send them an email saying these horrible things I did because he alleges it's in a recovered memory of his that he just remembered. I'm super happy and proud to have done what I've done in my life, especially the second half, where I've lived to learn with my depression and love living my life. And if being attacked is part of doing what I do, then I think it's worth it, even though it's difficult. But as long as what I do feels good and right to me, I will keep doing it. Many kids, most of us, are told to create goals. We're told to follow through with those goals, that we should not be a quitter. Quitting is a bad thing. Having goals and following through them and reaching our goals is a good thing. But is it? Can be. As far as I'm concerned, though, a goal is really important just to take one step in a particular direction. It can motivate us to do that, to keep moving, to keep learning and growing, exploring and finding things. But once we take that step, we are in a different place than we were before. In many ways, we can be a very different person than we were before, depending on the experiences we gathered with that step. And maybe now it's time to reevaluate the goal and see if we really want to go somewhere else. But the goal, there's nothing wrong with having a goal. It can motivate us to do really cool things. But also, having a goal and sticking with it when it's no longer really where we want to go gets in the way of living our life. We can also have goals that we continually reevaluate and we find obstacles in our way. This happens all the time. There are always going to be obstacles in our path in life. Sometimes these obstacles are ones that are easy, sometimes they're difficult, but if we can use them as an opportunity to reevaluate our goals and see if it's worth going through these obstacles, then yeah, go through those obstacles. But what if instead of an obstacle, it seems more like a door slammed shut in your face? And another one, and another one. Well, maybe that's not worth going to anymore. How about if it's constant doors? And how do we tell the difference between doors slammed in our face and obstacles? Well, we do know. Each of you knows the difference, but only you can tell the difference. But you can use that as an opportunity if you want to reevaluate your situation to see what step to take next. This forms the path of our lives. John Lennon has this quote apropos for just this. Life, he said, is what happens when you're busy making other plans. Try to remember that. It's a good one. When we do change our path from the goal we have been on, as the organizers here are experiencing, it's difficult. It can be really emotional. Part of our identity can be wrapped up in this path that we're on. But if we go that way and it seems right to us, then it frees up lots of time and energy to do the other cool stuff in our lives, which come next. I want to say just a little more about depression. and I've mentioned this in talks before too, but I was beaten up pretty much every day in grade school. The bullies beat me up for being gay, for being bad at sports, for not caring who wins a game, for not being competitive, for being geeky, introverted, fat. I was fat as a kid. The gym teacher would almost always be there, standing there, watching as the other kids, the bullies, were beating me up, and the other kids were just pointing and laughing. My parents were totally depressed and were no help because they couldn't even deal with their pain, let alone mine. Gym class was the worst for me, and maybe some of you can relate to this, but in the country I came from, the US, it was always with competitive team sports and people saying, "No, you take Altman, we had to take him last time." Yeah. Childhood can kind of suck for a lot of people, a lot of times. But I blamed myself for all of this because what did I know as a kid? What do any of us know as a kid? The experiences we have are normal. And I thought, I must deserve this. My parents don't seem to care. The gym teacher encourages it. The bullies keep doing what they do. I must be a miserable piece of shit that doesn't deserve to live. It was a long road of learning to unbury myself from all of these unconscious choices that I made for myself that are still part of me. Even though I made them as a child, they're still part of me, but they are less important now by far than they used to be. And even though a lot of this stuff sucked, totally sucked as a kid, as an adult, now in the second half of my life since 33, all of the abuse I got from bullies helps me empathize with so many people in so many ways, and that is invaluable. Being bullied also made me go off on my own so often. I wanted to be part of other kids, but I had no clue how. So I'd go off on my own during recess so I wouldn't get beaten up all the time, and I'd have to think about things in my own way and learn about things in my own way. And again, that totally sucked as a kid, but as an inventor, that's invaluable. Thinking about things in one's own way is what one needs to do as an inventor, and maybe that's partly why I'm an inventor. My journey now takes me to a place where I want to ask, what motivates us to do what we do? And do you find what you do in your life meaningful? How do you find meaning in doing what you do? How do any of us do that? Is that something that's related to happiness? If we find happiness, do we stay happy? How do we make things more positive this way? And what motivates each of us? There's so many different things that are possible. Just a short list. We can go for external validation from other people, which can feel really good. We can get attention from other people. We can find sex partners. Sex is kind of nice. Deeply held convictions from deep within, is that part of the motivation? Constant learning and growing and improving oneself. A need to serve from deep within, or just for validation from other people so we appear cool? Do we do it because we need it, because we want to avoid all the stuff that we don't want to deal with within ourselves in an addictive way? It could be some of those or all of those, plus other things. Validation is something we need. As social creatures, we need this. This is part of how we come together and stay together in clans, tribes, communities, whatever, and support one another. Getting validation motivates us to move forward. But what are we willing to do to gain that validation? If we have really low self-esteem, as I've had most of my life, maybe I would want to create a mask to put in front of myself that other people will see, that I think other people will like, unlike the miserable piece of shit that I thought I was that didn't deserve to live. And then people will validate that mask that I present. But that doesn't feel really authentic. They're not validating me. It doesn't feel like they're validating me. They're validating the mask that I put out. In my process growing up, one of the things I did to get validation was ignore my needs totally, because I was a miserable piece of shit that doesn't deserve to live. So I would ignore all my needs and wants and do stuff for other people that I thought they wanted. And then they might want me to be around. Again, that was really shitty as a kid. It didn't serve me well, and it kept keep me depressed. But as an adult, ignoring my needs and helping others enabled me to eventually become really good at nurturing people and being of service to other people. And now as an adult, I can do that really well quite often, while also taking care of my needs and wants and making sure that they're met. Another way I tried to get validation was through trying to be a perfect student, so I'd get validation from the teachers, not the bullies. And although that wasn't so effective as a kid, as an adult, that did mean that I learned a lot of really cool subjects as a kid that I can draw from now to do lots of the cool stuff that I do. So much of the need for validation comes from a basic human emotion called, in English, shame. Shame is a subject which is actually quite shameful to even talk about. Shame is an emotion that is required for social creatures. It keeps us from going too far out of line from the society we live in, whether it's way long ago in a clan or a tribe, or nowadays in a society or in our communities. It keeps us from getting too far out of line, and we feel shame for being so different, and it feels like it's wrong. We evolved to experience this because we need it as social creatures. What different societies, communities, tribes, clans, whatever, do to invoke that shame and is very, very different from community to community. But the way it feels is the same. It's really negative. And whether it's something big or small is also different from different communities, what triggers the shame. In a society like I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago in the US, it was very much a conformist culture where the slightest difference of perceived difference from the dogma of what one must be was enough for people to shame publicly another person, which, if left unchecked, leads to toxic shame, which is an outgrowth of growing up in such a conformist society. Toxic shame is a deep inner knowing, belief really, that one is fundamentally flawed. That is definitely one of my lifelong things. And that's what's triggered when I'm attacked on the internet and all of that, and I have to keep reminding myself to be in the here and now and not on the asphalt being bullied while the gym teacher watched while other people point and laugh. Shame can be used against us. All of us have the ability to feel it. Some of us, like me, can feel it much more easily than others, but all of us can be manipulated through our shame. Marketing, of course, we can be manipulated, whether it's for dish soap or a candidate for a political office, to buy things we don't want or need through our shame. Your life isn't good enough because you don't have product X. You're not part of the cool kids because you're not having product X. You're not going for this candidate, you're going with the loser. Things like this. We're all easily manipulated this way, which is one of the reasons why I made TV Gone, so I wouldn't be exposed to that kind of stuff. But to avoid the shame, we can get validation, external validation, to become the best at whatever it is we can be the best at, to get more money than others, to be a harder worker and get validation from our boss and coworkers. This can drive us, and it's external though. So what is enough? Once we get that validation, the validation goes away, but there we are, the same person we were, but not quite, because now we've been through one more repetition of getting validation and knowing that it really didn't change anything, except one more repetition later. And deep down, we're still the same. And we don't know what to do because any pain that starts coming up again, we want to push away again. And we don't know what to do, so we do the same thing we did again, which is get more validation. This is addiction. That's what drives so much addiction. There's never enough of whatever external thing, substance, behaviors, validation, whatever. We keep doing what we do until we make another choice. So much in our modern world is driven by addiction, and so many of the addictions are seen as positive, like making lots of money, like having lots of power over other people, like so many of the dicks in Silly Valley now who are CEOs imposing their will on all of us, whether we like it or not. These people are driven by their addictive behaviors. Having power, having money is something they do to push away the pain in their lives. And I try to remind myself to be empathetic with them, but my anger quite often wins out. Everything we do can be used to avoid ourselves. Everything, even things that are useful, even things we need to be alive, like eating. Eating disorders can be an addiction. Eating more chocolate, downloading porn, all of these things, there's nothing wrong with any of them in and of themselves. The only thing that's wrong, if you want to call it that, is if we know that we could have we can have a little bit more enjoyment in our life or much more enjoyment in our life if we made other choices rather than just doing the addictive behaviors. And if we know that, then we can, although it's not easy, make other choices. Yeah. The pain, the emotional pain that all of us carry to varying degrees never goes away. There's this notion in hippie kind of things, which I grew up in and still identify with, that we can heal ourselves of this. There is healing along the way, but the emotional pain and our experiences never go away unless we die or have a lobotomy. They will always be there. But they can become way less important than they were before, and they don't need to be pushed away. If we push them away, which I did exclusively for the first half of my life, then they get more power because it's always there, always waiting for something to trigger it up so it can bubble to the surface. And then I would do whatever I can before it's even conscious to push it away by some kind of addictive behavior, the first of which for me was watching TV to escape my miserable, hellish childhood, but many others that followed. Pushing it away makes it more intense. And if we don't have a way of letting it express itself where we can face it and deal with it, it will come out in unhealthy ways. Probably with people we love the most because they're the safest and the least likely to abandon us for this shitty kind of behavior. But we can, if we choose to, embrace the feelings, as painful as they are. We can embrace them and remind ourselves that, of course I have these feelings, as shitty as they are, as much as it sucks. Given my background, it's part of who I am. Of course, in this situation, I'm feeling this. And I'm glad I can tell myself that I am who I am, which is true in my life now. Wasn't when I was totally depressed. But this was part of the process of getting to a place where I could live with my depression and love living my life. Reminding myself that being who I am is the only thing I can be, and it's a good thing. So I can acknowledge the feelings, remind myself it's okay even though it sucks, and then I can focus on something more interesting rather than just repeat this and spiral down with it into depression. We don't have to automatically, without conscious choice, spiral down with it when it comes up. One of the ways I tried to avoid shame as a kid is when I was 13 years old, I heard an old recording on the radio from this guy called Alan Watts. He had this half-hour lecture about meditation. And he's one of the people who became one of my intellectual heroes later, but he said that meditation is an incredibly powerful tool. And as a 13-year-old wanting to fix myself, I thought meditation would be a powerful tool to help me fix myself. It's a powerful tool, which I use all the time now as an adult, and it's so helpful, and I encourage everyone to check it out. But as a kid, I tried to use it to fix myself, and instead I made a mess of myself just to change my outward behaviors from what I thought other people wanted of me in various situations, and it was crazy making. But as an adult, I use meditation all the time now in this last half of my life and for every day since then, and I'm really good at it, and it's super helpful. Another thing I did as a teen was being right all the time. I didn't want to be wrong. My self-esteem was riding on this. I became really good at arguing. I became really good at putting people down for being wrong. And I became really good at arguing in this way. It wasn't a conscious choice, though. It was something compelling me because so much of my self-worth was riding on it. I must have been an incredible bummer to be around at that age. As an adult, though, being good at arguing, it's actually useful. I don't argue to win anymore. I argue now to present points with people who there's agreements and disagreements, respectfully learning from the other person as hopefully they're learning from me. And that can be way cool. Another thing in my childhood that has a huge effect on me, and maybe some of you can relate to this, is rage. Not just anger, but rage. My father, I found out near the end of his life, had lots of rage due to his experiences of being in the Korean War in the 1950s before I was born. He had lots of really powerful emotions which he was terrified of. But the biggest one for him was rage. But emotions in our family were forbidden. There were no emotions. Nothing, no affection, a lot of intellect, a lot of really cool things otherwise, definitely a lot of neglect as well, but emotions were forbidden, and especially anger. It never came up, except for 3 times where it came up triggered by for my father by trivial things that had nothing to do with anything. And that, for me and my brothers, was the end of the world. And I learned to do the same thing. Since I was full of rage and I was terrified of it, being rageful of the bullies and the gym teacher and my parents who I blamed for not caring enough and blaming myself, I carried lots of rage, and I was terrified that if I expressed anger, that all of it would come out at someone, and no one deserves that. No one deserves the full brunt or even part of my rage. That's my shit, not anyone else's. But when I was in India is when I learned about all of this, oddly enough, in a meditation hall, a beautiful meditation hall full of hundreds of people meditating with a context of being asked to explore emotions from your past that may no longer serve you so well. And I connected with this rage. And since then, I have gotten lots of practice at expressing anger in an appropriate way so that I can do it and be respectful and get some of my needs met. As an adult, this serves me very well. I've also been totally terrified of other aspects inside of myself. One of the big ones, of course, for me is being gay, which was totally taboo as I was growing up. It's not quite as bad now for a lot of people, but that was something I was terrified of looking at, as well as all the rage that I carry, and as well as being someone who deserves being ignored by parents and being bullied, et cetera, et cetera. I've learned as an adult and transitioning to the second half of my life when I was 33 to face the things I'm afraid of. Again, to acknowledge them and explore them. And this serves me really well. Let's see. I'll skip some of these. Addictions are things that I've been through, and probably a lot of us have. All of them I learned a lot from, and that's what drew me into them. But all of them took away way more than they gave, and I abused the hell out of all these things, TV addiction being the first one for me. But all of these things do serve me now in my life, this second half of life, which I am way into living. TV Be Gone addiction, or TV addiction, led to TV Be Gone, which is how I've made a living for the last 20 years, and which enables me to stand in front of you while all of you just listen. I've sold 880,000 of those things. It's kind of crazy. We can make use of what we believe was what was wrong with us when we were kids. Rationality is another thing that I really abused, and many of us geeky people, I think, abuse. As geeks, when we're faced with a problem, we tend to instantly go to our head and look at something as an intellectual problem to figure out, to solve. And that can be really useful in part, but not as the whole. As a kid, I admired the character Spock on Star Trek, admiring his ignoring all those icky, messy emotions and just being rational. And I didn't know it then, but know it very well now, that what made the character interesting was his struggle between intellect, rationality, and emotions. When some difficult problem comes up in life, intellect can be a useful tool, but so can emotions and feelings. In fact, they might be a better tool in conjunction with the rationality. A problem such as, for instance, should I quit my job? That is not an intellectual problem to solve. There's intellectual aspects that can come to service for solving that problem, but how do you answer that? One exercise that I have found that's really useful for questions like this and many, many others is to think about the question, close your eyes, and imagine that you've answered that question. Just now answered that question, and then imagine what it feels like to have answered that question. I just quit my job. What does it feel like? How do you imagine it'll feel like in a week, in a month from making that decision, in a year? And then do it the other way around, or maybe several different ways if it's a complex question. I decided not to quit my job. How do you imagine that feels? That's a lot of really useful information. Perhaps even better than making a rational list of column of pro and a column of cons and trying to figure it out, although that can be useful too. That's something that many people I mentor have found a lot of utility in. One of the things about being so depressed as a kid that is useful to me now is that it motivates me to do things that I not only like, but love. I don't want to waste whatever time I have left doing things I don't like. I don't want to do things I know I hate. I'm motivated to explore and find things, to even take risks as appropriate, to try to do what I think might make my life better. If I weren't depressed, maybe I would just be working a job that's just kind of okay rather than living a life I totally love. Kind of an interesting, almost paradox. But learning to live with depression includes that. I want to mention also that everything is temporal, as I mentioned earlier. Everything endures through time only for some amount of time, not forever, as has been mentioned in previous talks as well today. Parallel Polis will be no more after this, after 11 years. This building will be here, but under a different name, different organization. This conference, who knows? But our lives, each of us has so much time, we don't know how much, but that and no more. And because we have so little time, we want things to work out the way we want them to. Of course we do. But we can become too attached to the outcome. When we're attached to the outcome, we can become very much burned out. Motivation can ideally not come from needing an outcome to be a certain way, but for doing what we do because we know it's the right thing to do. If we know it's the right thing to do, even if it doesn't come out the way we want, we can try again and try again. We can do that for as long as we're alive and choose to do it. The structures surrounding us, society, governments, corporations, the faces change, the people change, but they endure. They can keep pushing and pushing and pushing. That's another thing that can lead us to want results now. We're impatient. We want things to be better now. But it doesn't work that way. If we change too quickly, society can have a lot of backlash against us. And again, the choices we make aren't always easy. The external circumstances have a lot to say on what we feel okay about making choices about. But we can make those choices. We have total control over the choices we make. We have no control over the consequences. Because of the consequences, we'll feel what we feel, we'll think what we think, and we'll learn, if we choose to, from those thoughts and feelings and the other consequences. And then we know more than we used to know, and we can now make, hopefully, better choices. And then there will be consequences for those that we have no control over. And then we'll think and we'll feel and we'll learn more from that if we choose to. This process is the process I see as my life. A sequence of choices, learning from them, making new choices, so that I can look back from where I am now, from where I came from, getting to where I am now because of the choices I made. And this can be true from you too, for you too. I find deep, intense meaning in that process. That process in and of itself gives my life personal meaning. So that over time, choice by choice, day by day, month by month, year by year, I can, hopefully, probably, improve my life and those around me. I can do that even when I'm feeling like shit, because life has ups and downs. And when I'm feeling like shit, it's just as painful as ever. But I can remind myself, acknowledge myself that the feelings are real, that it's okay to be me, and that I am so grateful to be feeling everything I feel. After the first 33 years of my life being totally depressed and so many destructive behaviors, nearly dying so many times, somehow I survived. Somehow. I have no idea how, but I am so grateful to be alive, to be here with you, to feel everything I feel, whether it's like shit or like right now, being surrounded by people like you who I admire, people who I can continually learn from and share with and feel wonderful with. When life is magical and pure joy, and I am way grateful to be alive, to be feeling all of that. So thank you. Hey. Thanks.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions.
One second. Let me get you a microphone. Let me give you, Max, let me give you a microphone so that we have it on the recording. Thank you.
Documentation.
This is recorded for always here.
Yeah, so the discussion of addiction and the cycle seemed very Buddhist. Was that intentional?
Yeah, Alan Watts was a huge influence on my life, coming across him as a 13-year-old. And his main thing was he grew up wanting to be some kind of Christian preacher kind of guy, but freaked out and became a scholar in Eastern philosophies. And he's incredibly good at explaining Eastern notions, Eastern philosophical notions to a Western mind. And that resonated with me greatly as a kid for many of the wrong reasons, but as I lived longer, found great utility in. I don't consider myself a Buddhist, although I had to lie and say I'm a Buddhist whenever I'd go to China because that's the only way they would give me real vegetarian food. Otherwise, they put little pieces of meat in it and say that it's better that way because it has more flavor. But if I said I'm Buddhist, they'd believe me. But anyways, I'm not a Buddhist, but I very much resonate with many Buddhist notions.
I have an open-ended question. So when I was growing up, I was kind of waiting for this moment that people call adulthood, that it will happen and suddenly I will know what I'm doing, and and I'm waiting for 42 years now and it still didn't happen. But you said that there's this like this feeling when you know what you're doing or you know that you're right or something. So should I wait, or how does it work? There was no manual, so.
Well, you just said the magic word 42, which is the meaning, the answer to the
Yes.
life, the universe, and everything. But I don't have the answer other than 42. But I do have my experiences. I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. Absolutely
Thank you.
not.
It's a very good validation.
But, you know, looking back at my life, I've been alive 67 years, and it really has been about 33 where I can look back only with a lot of time in between and see there was a transition there for me. It's not like suddenly I could do things easy and before it was hard. Life is still hard. Life is still very much ups and downs, as I hope I conveyed. Sometimes things really are painful, but what's changed is my perspective on it all. Over time, with the experience that I have, positive and negative, and choosing to learn from all of it, and choosing, even when things are horrible, like a friend committing suicide, I can do something positive with that to help me and other people. And whereas before, I would have just been self-absorbed, as depression forces people to be, really, and spiral down with it, and then, you know, more or less blame myself, but wanting to blame other people, and et cetera, just spiraling down with the vicious cycle of depression. But at 33 is when I first started to get some tools that were starting to be effective, and that was the result of a lot of work, meditation being part of it, choosing to learn, having these perspectives that I got. But we all have to go through it in our own way. So I don't have the answers, but I have experience to share if it's helpful.
Yeah, hey Mitch, thank you for this really beautiful and moving talk where you really, you know, make yourself very vulnerable and you share. And I think it's really, it was very helpful for me.
Oh, good, thanks.
And I felt that in so many words, you were sort of talking about, you know, the topic of trauma, in particular childhood trauma, and how it affects our life going forward and the choices that we make. And so I'm here at this conference because I'm now for 10 years in the so-called crypto industry. And what got me originally hooked in this industry was the promise of resolving trauma, like global trauma of oppression and surveillance and capitalism, actually. I thought this was like a post-capitalist movement in a sense, very naive of me, I think, now. And now I feel it's all about reproducing trauma in this industry, and nobody's sort of talking about it. So I know this is a very tiny sliver of what you've just been addressing, but maybe you can share some thoughts on I don't know, on the statement and how you look at it and how you would frame it in your, with the experience.
Yeah, well, that brings up a whole other talk, really. I'm good at various aspects of technology, electronics in particular, and electronics is an incredibly powerful tool. And given that the country that I grew up in, the United States of America, the biggest single component of the economy is military. And so everything that is done, there's a lot of money being spent to see how it can be used to kill, destroy, spy. And so everything that I've ever worked on, 100%, no exceptions, has been used for that. And the companies that I was a consultant for, the bosses, I'll get to that. The bosses said, hell yeah, that'll make us a lot of money, so we'll do it. And I always quit after that. And each time I thought this is something where that wouldn't happen. Until TV be gone, there's no military application for TV be gone. Turning TVs off in public places is not a military process. So I've been free of that since then. Not yet. Well, it's been 20 years, but who knows? I mean, there's a lot of thought and effort on how to do everything for making maximum profit every quarter. I mean, this is neoliberal capitalism. Regardless of any consequences, that's what's going to be happening. And, like all of the people who I've met in the early days of the whole crypto thing are very idealistic. And people who I've known since I was a kid who were working on the early versions of the internet before the World Wide Web, very idealistic. We all thought we were doing things to make the world a better place, but co-option is a huge part of the dominant paradigm that surrounds us. Capitalism is a huge, powerful force that we are living within, and it will morph and take everything for its own ends, as if it's a living creature. And it's one of the few things which is like the evil cartoon character, what can I do today? But it's not a conscious thing, it's just the way it works. And if we put out something into the world which is supposed to be a new economy away from centralized banks, but it has some way of converting between fiat currency and what we want to have as a better way of doing things, suddenly it becomes speculative, and these speculative assholes just use it for that. And now whenever anyone hears the word Bitcoin, it's, should I invest in it? Nothing to do with anything that we heard in the early days, but so it goes. But like with everything else, we can choose to learn from what happens. We have no control over anything when we put it out into the world, including our choices, including our projects, including cryptocurrency. But we can learn, if we choose to, from what happens and then make new choices that will hopefully be better. But we did do what we thought at the time was the best thing to be doing. So many of us, each in our own way, collectively, and here we are. Well, the internet is the best spy device, better than the former East German government where I now live. It's way beyond that. And the country I come from, well, they're masters at it. What do we do in the face of that? Well, we each can come up with our own way, and we each have our different way of being called to do whatever we do, and it's all of that put together which leads to positive social change. So keep doing whatever it is you're doing and learning from the consequences and make new choices.
And be excellent to each other.
As best as we can.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah.